Hello, welcome to Okawa Book Club. So we're your hosts, I'm Dylan.
I'm John.
And we're going to be discussing the teachings of Ryuho Okawa. Ryuho Okawa is a world teacher, master, and CEO of Happy Science Group. All right, folks, strap yourself into this spaceship because we're about to go into the universe. Today's episode is With Savior, Messages from Space Being Yaidron. So this is, in some meaning, a spiritual interview series because, as you know from a previous episode, we've had spiritual messages from the guardian spirits of the candidates, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. This is similar in one way, but different in another way. What it is spiritual dialogues with a space being from outside this planet, an extraterrestrial, in other words. His name is Yaidron. In the preface, Master Okawa writes, "You may find this a mysterious book. A person with interest will enjoy it, thinking, how generous to have revealed such secrets this much. While a person with no interest will make a grimace and say, well, he can say whatever he wants." Later on, he says, "Some of you may say, you want me to believe in space people when I can't even believe in ghosts? But remember, it was this year that the US President, Donald Trump, publicly admitted the existence of UFO and space beings. The truth can no longer remain hidden." Ryuho Okawa. So that's really where we are today. Is a lot of people have talked about flying saucers, UFOs, and all these different things over the years. Hollywood has portrayed it hundreds and hundreds of times probably. But what we're dealing with is now a real time to accept what's going on. The space age has opened, and now humankind is about to become more and more aware of what's really going on in this universe. Who's contacting our planet, what types of beings are visiting us, and how that's all unfolding. But this message from Yaidron is not just like a gray or just an average alien spirit that's coming to Master Okawa. I'm actually just going to read from, in this book, a description of this space being called Yaidron. It says, "He is a space being from planet Elder in the Magellanic Clouds. He is a powerful being with higher dimensional powers in the Earth spirit world and is a god of justice-like being. On Elder, he works as someone like the Chief Justice and the highest-ranking statesman, and is in charge of justice and judgment. In the past, Yaidron was taught by Alcantara on a Messiah-like training planet, and is currently protecting Master Ryuho Okawa, who is the human incarnation of Alcantara. Yaidron has an infinite lifespan, transcending both physical and spiritual bodies. He has been involved with the rise and fall of civilizations, wars, and major disasters on Earth." Mind-blowing, right, John?
Absolutely. And I mean, as far to my knowledge, the name Yaidron doesn't appear anywhere else.
Right.
Outside of this literature.
Right. So this is a name maybe first revealed by Ryuho Okawa, but in fact, maybe long, long before recorded history, before our current civilization, he appeared various places, in these pivotal moments in human times to help humanity steer in the right direction and protect great prophets and saviors. If all of this sounds like too much for you, well, you can find video footage of Yaidron's UFO, which was recorded on September 28, 2020. By purchasing this book, you can have access to the video and you can learn much more about what's really going on. All right, so John, we introduced Yaidron and we talked about what kind of being he is. But before we get into the contents, I want to discuss how Master Okawa can contact him. So what's really going on here? That's a very interesting question. In fact, Yaidron, since he is a being beyond physical and spiritual bodies, he is ultimately transporting himself throughout the universe. And what that means is our science is currently understanding the very beginning levels of space travel. There is higher dimensions. This world is the third dimension. We have 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th above us. And advanced life forms, like these high-dimensional spirits or extraterrestrials, they can actually transcend to higher dimensions and travel very quickly beyond the speed of light, beyond our material limitations, and do things that we would have no idea what's taking part, because we are just at the beginning levels of science in this perspective.
Absolutely, Dylan. And I think it's interesting. We're obviously humans right now are so limited with space travel. I mean, we've only, as a species, gone to the moon a small handful of times. We haven't reached Mars yet. And part of this, I believe, the problem is not having the sufficient understanding of how the fourth dimension works. Because the fourth dimension is, as was explained in the 9 dimensions, is a plane where your thought instantly brings you to any place in reality. So you are literally traveling faster than the speed of light there. So if a ship was able to go to that place or that dimension, raise its vibration, then it could travel to any point in space or time in the third dimensional universe, which brings a radically different perspective of time than the one that humanity today is used to.
That's so true, and it's exactly right. Everything comes down to vibrations. That's the secret of the spirit world, secret of the multidimensional universe. We are essentially called matter, but matter is just vibration in its lowest form. So by transcending matter and transcending this third dimension of height, width, and depth, we can enter a dimension which goes beyond the fourth dimensional boundary of time. And that's how these space beings like to travel around the universe at high speeds. Since Master Okawa is an expert of the spiritual world and he can talk to beings in heaven and hell, that he can talk to extraterrestrials who use a similar way as the high spirits and evil spirits of connecting to the higher dimensions based on their vibration.
I think today when most people think about the possibility of communicating with any type of extraterrestrial entity, we're thinking of using machines and mathematics and possibly code, binary, things of that nature. But what Master Okawa has shown us is that they could speak directly through the mind, through our nervous system, the same way that a spirit would. And, so I think it speaks to the notion that, by denying the spirit world, you're also denying yourself the ability to communicate with the space beings of this universe.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if you're still with us, I'm sure that you have some familiarity with these kinds of things, but now we want to talk about the contents of this book, this really amazing book, With Savior. So the title, With Savior, was actually given by Yaidron himself. He gave this as an inspiration to Master Okawa. And he talks about various ideas and concepts that are currently problems in our modern civilization. So John, I want to ask you about Yaidron's view of what's really happening right now with this coronavirus pandemic. The world has become very totalitarian in some fashion, but it's also, we're increasing lockdowns, government control, everything. But what does Yaidron think about this coronavirus pandemic?
Well, Yaidron really was pretty straightforward in stating that the coronavirus pandemic was manufactured by humans, most likely in China, as many of us have speculated. But he does also believe that on some level, pandemics and things of this nature, catastrophes, do come to humanity in times when we are experiencing a lot of religious conflict. And right now, there certainly is religious conflict in the world, but I think the greater religious conflict is actually between religion itself and communism at this point in time. Idron brought up an interesting point during the interview, and he says that the communism virus has been spreading since the 1800s, presumably with the onset of the publication of the Communist Manifesto and Marx's literature, and that what it did was the ideologies of communism, people essentially would read them and it would change their minds, and their minds would then change their body and hence their DNA. So it created a type of communism DNA. And so the conflict today is between communist DNA and faith DNA. And so when something of that nature is happening, it might be expected that there will be catastrophes on a global scale because there's such a rupture in human nature and an imbalance.
Yeah, that is totally mind-blowing again, right?
Yeah.
The idea of this fake DNA and communism virus. He talks about how, China is actually the main source of this communism virus in the modern age, and how Xi Jinping is trying to make China this modern Nazism or modern evil regime that's trying to, really take over the world and stop the United States. So it's interesting that a space being is so in tune with politics, and he's giving judgments about politics on Earth. How does this planet look from an objective, neutral, third-party perspective? And especially a Messiah-like being like Yaidron, who was in charge of justice on his home planet.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's essentially giving us an objective perspective of our species and planet that is thousands and thousands of years ahead in evolution, and giving us very practical advice that we could start putting into practice right now as a species, if we're willing to learn from it and listen to it.
Yeah, and that takes us to, in chapter 1, it talks about the single ray of light in the age of chaos. Human beings need to discover the mind and the soul. So, as we talked about this, we're in a crisis era right now. We are in an era where people are forgetting about this perspective of life, and then they're losing to this communist way of thinking. But actually, the soul does exist. The mind does exist. And the spiritual world is the real world. So once we know that, we can really make totally new judgments and have confidence in religion again, have confidence in the power of faith. But there's one savior on this planet right now. That's Master Okawa.
Exactly.
That's why Yaidron is actually here. He's here to protect Lord Alcantara, Master Yehokawa.
24/7.
24/7. So we're really in this tough, difficult moment right now where we have to have a war against the dark side of the universe, against the light side. And it's us, people like us, and people like you listening to this podcast that are at the front lines of this war, this spiritual war.
And it's taking place within each of us every day, every hour of every day.
Right. It's not on just the outside, but it's within our own mind. It's the battle against our own inner darkness every day. Once you understand that, you can really see the world from a great perspective.
One thing I thought was really interesting that Yaidron mentions in the book that really hit home for me was this idea of how so much of the communist ideology pertains to inequality of resources. But something that isn't really touched upon is that there's currently an inequality of knowledge where, knowledge is in many ways becoming restricted to people who identify as being leftists, and especially more towards the extreme side of that. Universities for the most part are essentially schools for leftist indoctrination. So much of the media is essentially the same. And they've created a language of knowledge that is used to reconfigure the way people think. And for those who don't speak that language, it becomes very difficult to appear knowledgeable in society. And I thought it was such an interesting concept and an important concept, that, the fact that one perspective can have a monopoly on knowledge is incredibly dangerous. In the corporate world, when there's a monopoly on something, generally the company has to be broken up and to allow for fairness in the free market.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That kind of takes us to another point, which is the idea that science is always right and science is the highest value in this world. But Yaidron talks about AI. He mentions about artificial intelligence. And, his perspective is that that is so ancient to his understanding of technology. We think AI is the cutting edge of technology, but from his perspective, maybe he's 1,000 years or more ahead of us. He thinks that that's old, ancient technology that's outdated and no longer useful. So he talks about, he flies his UFOs with the power of enlightenment. It's connected to his mind. So maintaining a calm mind is the way to maintain peaceful spaceflight. And I think almost nobody on Earth, maybe less than 1 in a billion people, would think that way.
Yeah. I like that he says, when he's being asked questions by the interviewers about how the ship moves around, because they see it moving, on a horizontal plane, but also on a vertical plane. And he says nothing inside the ship is moving when that happens. There's no parts, being changed around. It's not mechanical.
Right. Yeah, it's totally beyond our current understanding completely, which is really humbling, to be honest, because it puts humanity as this, we have such confidence in ourselves as human beings. We build highways, we build skyscrapers, and we go to the moon. But from outside the world's perspective, they might think, okay, they're just at the first step. They have so many more steps to go.
Right.
That's really humbling in many ways.
Yeah, and I think as a species, it's so important that we stay humble. Every generation, there are people who believe we are farther than we've ever been. We're like, and they're so in awe of the advancements that have been made, usually technological advancements. But in reality, if you think of where we were 100 years ago in terms of technology to where we are now, it would look like we came a long way, but there is still infinitely farther summits to ascend to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we are on this eternal path, and the only way we can really stay protected from things like natural disasters, which he mentioned, and pandemics and wars and all these major things that diminish the population, is if we stay within the path of the truth. That's why these extraterrestrials are not materialistic. They're very spiritual. The benevolent beings like the messiahs and beings like Yaidron, which are like at the highest level, they are very religious and spiritual, because only when our society maintains that spirituality and that religious pillar can we actually keep making advancement without causing ourselves to destroy ourselves. I really was humbled and thankful that we have such a perspective given to us. Only in Happy Science you can find this kind of a thing. So, we've talked a lot today about various topics. I just want to just do a teaser that, those who read this book, you can learn how Yaidron thinks about U.S. politics, how Yaidron is actually helping to create livable planets through like a terraforming and water teleportation. And it's all just totally beyond anything you've ever read before. So you can pick it up at Happy Science locations or on Amazon.com or OkawaBooks.com. I think you'll love this title, With Savior. To end today's session, John, can you just read one part of the afterword of With Savior?
Sure. This book discloses the mission of Ryuo Okawa from the perspective of space beings. It also outlines the conditions on how humanity can interact with their space friends who have evolved to the highest level. Everything that is written in this book is fact itself. How I communicate with space beings uses almost the same system as when I conduct spiritual messages.
Yeah, that says it. Everything there is fact itself. So come check out this fact for yourself. It was great talking to you again, John.
Likewise, Dylan.
In these trying times, stay happy, healthy, and positive.